developed a spiritual system over many thousands of years. A deeper look into the spiritual systems around the continent will show you that many of them had the same ideas conceptually, but called them different names, the same as we do today with God and Allah. What we know as borders and countries in Africa didn't exist until the Berlin Conference in 1884. The Kemetic system that most of us are familiar with is the one I will be referencing and is one of the most recent ancient African spiritual systems. Their system we know the best because they left it in stone. Again, the question is, who did Africans pray to before slavery? The quick answer is this: they didn't pray to anyone because they knew they were gods. The question itself presumes the idea that ancient Africans were religious who worshiped, prayed, and thought as we do today. In modern times, our thought processes and paradigm have a completely religious bias. We must reorient our thinking from religion to spirituality. The ancient Africans had a completely different but holistic paradigm based on spiritual science principles. Before I move forward, I want to make sure we're on the same page, so I need to define and explain the difference between religion and spirituality. I also want to express that I'm speaking about how these ideas are practiced in our daily lives and not necessarily a strict book interpretation. First, religion. Religion is something that you're taught. In the case of the Christian religion, it's based on a set of doctrines and dogma that one must accept and follow in order to belong to the religion. Second, spirituality. For the ancient Africans before slavery, they would say that spirituality is what we're born with. It's recognizing that you are a soul in a human body. It's being in touch with your own divine self. It's your natural state. Spirituality is ancient. It's based on ideas that you are a unique aspect of the Creator with a unique spiritual and life experience. I know from experience as a Christian, we were taught that religion and spirituality are the same thing. They're not. The idea of a unique spiritual experience was a theological threat to Christianity. Eliminating that threat of individuality is an aspect of religion to this day. Christian fathers essentially despiritualized the ancient teachings. In the ancient African paradigm, the real you is the Ka, or soul, not the physical body. For them, the Ka emerged from the source of creation. Two major points to understand here. Number one is a Ka, or soul, is what ancient Africans viewed themselves as, not the physical body. They were eternal beings in a transitory form as a physical body. Number two, the Ka formed the physical body. The Ka is eternal and has many physical incarnations for a reason I will touch on later. The Ka was created from the stuff of the netter of netters, or God, and the Ka created the physical body from itself. I know the idea that God didn't directly create everyone may be difficult for some, but I'm expressing African spiritual science, not religious doctrines. That was their paradigm. It was different than how we are taught in religion. Now, mind you, the religion that we know is the ancient African paradigm that was repackaged and given to the world as the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So now that you have a foundation of the African spiritual paradigm and its contrast to our modern religious paradigm, let's get to the question. Who did the Africans pray to before slavery? So here's the answer. Ancient Africans before slavery knew there was one God that created everything in existence from itself. It would be analogous to God being an ocean, with the ocean being symbolic of the entirety of existence. They thought that as a Ka, you are a drop in that ocean. As a Ka, you are the same stuff as the ocean, just not the same magnitude. Sticking with the analogy of the ocean, as Christians, we're taught to believe that as drops, we're different from the ocean. It's an absurd notion when you analyze it that way. Within the Christian paradigm, because we're different, we have to cultivate a relationship to God. When we ask the question, who did Africans pray to before slavery? It's with the mentality given to us through slavery that we even approach the idea. Again, it presumes the ancient Africans thought religiously as we do today. They had a different, holistic, and more empowering paradigm. Sticking with the ocean analogy, ancient Africans didn't pray to the ocean. They recognized that they were aspects of the ocean and it was in themselves. They would say that the ocean is a multitude of drops. That's logical, right? That's the ancient African spiritual science concept. The ancient Africans before slavery, understanding that they were drops or gods and goddesses, would seek to express and harness the power of the ocean already within and through their God self. The aspect of the God self they termed the higher Ka. Through a religious paradigm, we have been taught to pray to something outside ourselves, believing that we're separate from God and need to cultivate a favorable relationship with God. The ancient Africans taught that as an eternal Ka, you are on a journey to recognize your own divinity or God self. Expressing yourself as a Ka in flesh through many incarnations is one way that the higher Ka learns and emerges as a God self. As a human being, you simply work daily to strengthen your awareness of the connection to your higher Ka for guidance. Knowing they were a Ka, the ancient Africans didn't pray to something. They would turn inward, tap into the power of that ocean of consciousness, and as gods and goddesses create what they desired. Today, because we've been sold and bought the repackaged religion,
Again, it's virtually impossible to point to any location in Africa and claim that this is the spot in which religion was first formulated. It's really not that simple. One scholar named Deji Ayegboyan has a great article in the Encyclopedia of African Religion that covers this topic. I thought his ideas about the origin of religion in Africa was worthy of note, and so we'll be borrowing from his ideas primarily. Most of this video will be a sort of philosophical sparring session between African history and the origin of religion, and thus should not be taken as an all-conclusive truth. I think what Deji Ayegboyan gives us is a foundation that can be used to study early African religion, a tangible outline we can build off of to understand the very concept of religion itself from an African perspective. So let's begin. A powerful fact that Deji Ayegboyan points out about the concept of religion in Africa concerns African languages itself. According to him, there aren't any words in African languages that refer to religion as a specific activity. He points out that the idea of religion is a borrowed concept coming from the influences of Europeans and Arabs. The question of polytheism or monotheism is not an African question and has limited value in trying to understand how Africans came to view their lives and those of their neighbors. One does not have to draw sharp distinctions between those who believe in many deities and those who purport to believe in one deity to gain an appreciation of the complexity of the African way of life. In fact, most Africans accept a belief in one creator deity, although there may be many spirits. Thus, in reality, this is similar to the later forms of religion, which follow the African pattern in many respects. Now, Professor Deji doesn't elaborate further on this particular quote, but I imagine he may be speaking about how monotheistic religions such as Christianity and Islam worship one supreme deity, but still have lesser powerful entities such as angels or demons. Deji seems to suggest that though these religions are far removed, it still follows what he calls an African pattern. Before we go more in depth with African religion, there are some useful scholarly speculations about why religion came to be in the first place. Deji Ayegboyan discusses some of these general theories and applies them to African people. These theories include psychological, intellectual, emotional, and others. Proponents of the psychological theory claim that early Africans created gods or supernatural beings as a result of ignorance, fears, and anxiety. The intellectual theory maintains that early Africans were trying to make sense of the world around them. I find the emotional theory to be the most interesting. Emotional theorists propose that religious beliefs arose from emotions. They maintain that early African religion was not something thought out, but rather danced out to forestall the mounting of fear and anxiety in conditions where success is uncertain. According to Deji Ayekboyan, if we conceptualize so-called African religion as simply an extension of a particular African ethnic group's way of life, instead of a separate identity altogether, as we sometimes do in the West, then the origins of African religion become a little less vague, morphing into a philosophical utility that holds more weight. It appears that the idea of responding to the environment, relationships, and mysteries might have occurred so far in antiquity that we will never know the precise origin of human response to the universe. Nevertheless, these early attempts to explain the environment may be called the origins of religion when defined as a way of life. I think the one thing we can point to concerning the origin of religion that's tangible is the origin of monotheism. There does seem to be some direct documentation that speaks to the concept of one God, documentation that points in one location, and it began on the African continent. Africans were the first humans to conceive of a concept of monotheism, and Akhenaten has been considered the first person to have commented on the idea of one God. Of course, there is ample evidence to note that many African traditions accepted that the supreme deity was too distant to deal with daily issues. These were left for the interventions of ancestors and other spirits. Even though we cannot conclusively say African religion began here or there, I think we can begin challenging our own paradigms on religion and rethink how we view the concept of religion on the African continent. I think at the very least, Deji Ayekboyan has helped us to dispel our assumptions about the question itself. For those who may not know, Christianity started in the Levant region, which is right in between Europe and Africa. When Europeans embraced Christianity, they began to popularize it, especially with their paintings of biblical figures during the Renaissance period. These biblical figures were assigned with European features, not only so the people can relate to them, but it also evolved to project an idea that the European phenotype is close to divinity. Christian art by Europeans became a powerful tool for European supremacy, especially during the colonial period. And as 21st century intellectuals in the Black community revisited this past, it tended to paint the overall history and development of Christianity in an impressive light, especially when it comes to its relationship with Africa. But let's actually follow the religious history of Christianity and find out how African people were introduced to it. The very first encounter with the continent and Jesus is actually found in the Bible in the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 14 through 15. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So as we can see, according to the Christian Bible itself, Jesus fled to Egypt, fleeing potential persecution from King Herod. The second encounter with Jesus and the continent was when Jesus was about to get crucified, and a man from North Africa named Simon of Cyrene came to help him bear the weight of the cross. Interestingly enough, according to the Bible, one of Jesus' first experiences on earth was in Africa, and one of his last encounters was also with a man from Africa. During this time, there were many people from Egypt and other regions in North Africa that came to the Levant as merchants. So North Africans were literally there to witness the life of Jesus. Even though there were people from North Africa present in the Levant during the time of Jesus, what was the first official sign of a converted Christian in Africa? Well, the Christian Bible also makes mention of this. In the book of Acts chapter 8, verses 26 and 27, it states, "Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, 'Go south to the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza.' So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of the Kandake. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship. So the first official sign of a Christian in Africa was a Cushite official from ancient Nubia. The message of Christianity apparently penetrated all the way down to Cush, and a Cushite man accepted Christianity. The Christian Bible tells us that the Cushite was actually on his way to Jerusalem to worship. The conversion of this Cushite signifies the long and extensive history of Christian Africans in Nubia. As we can confirm historically, ancient Nubia harbored 3 Christian kingdoms: the kingdom of Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia. Christianity in the kingdom of Nobatia began to take a stronghold around the 5th century. The first officially recognized Christian king of Nobatia was King Silko. By the end of the 6th century, Makuria had converted to Christianity. What's so significant about Makuria is that this Christian nation literally stopped the Arabs from conquering further south into Eastern Africa and spreading Islam through conquest for quite some time. According to historian al-Baladhuri, at the Battle of Dungalo, the Muslims found that the Nubians fought strongly and met them with showers of arrows. The majority of Arab forces returned with wounded and blinded eyes. It was thus that the Nubians were called the pupil smiters. One day, they came out against us and formed a line. We wanted to use swords, but we were not able to, and they shot at us and put out eyes to the number of 150. The kings of Makuria apparently took their religion very serious, as they even took on Christian names such as King Abraham, King Solomon, and King David. In fact, there's a tombstone from the Makurian king, King David. As we can see, the inscriptions are clearly Nubian script with obvious crosses on the bottom, advancing Christian imagery and symbolism. And our last kingdom is Alodia. The kingdom of Alodia was officially converted to Christianity in the 6th century. Alodia is described as being larger, wealthier, and even more powerful than Makuria, with the country covering a large region. Now, this is where we get to Inner Africa. The first sign of Christianity in Inner Africa was actually in Ethiopia during the reign of the Aksumite Empire. Although Christianity existed long before the rule of King Ezana of the Aksumite Empire, the religion took a strong foothold when it was declared a state religion in 330 AD. So how did Christianity come to Ethiopia? Funny story, actually. After being shipwrecked and captured at an early age, Frumentius, a man from Lebanon, was carried to Aksum, where he was treated well. It was Frumentius who converted King Ezana to Christianity, and the religion became official. So far, we've documented the presence of Christianity in North Africa and its flow down into Eastern Africa, from Egypt all the way to Ethiopia. But what about Western Africa? How did Christianity come to that part of the continent? Well, there's a general idea that Christianity first came to Africa via colonialism, and that simply isn't true, as we proved earlier. But when it comes to Western Africa, we assume this as well. However, Christianity actually entered Western Africa via trade with the Portuguese around the 15th century. To begin with, Africans in the West had a relatively positive trading relationship with the Portuguese. And when you're trading things, you're not only trading items, but you're also trading ideas. And it was in this context that the Congo Empire embraced Christianity in the 15th century. The unique thing about Congo was that there was a huge movement led by Kempavida to understand Christianity strictly from an African perspective, because they began to realize the manipulation of the Portuguese. The Congo Empire has a very long and extensive history with Christianity that is very well documented. The Bakongo people were very much a part of the Christian world. So given this historical perspective when it comes to Africa, Christianity flowed into the continent very naturally as it did in other parts of the world. I mean, it only makes sense that Christianity would flow into Africa naturally, as the birthplace of Christianity is literally right outside of Egypt.
is one long book, but the truth is, it's more like a whole library, representing topics ranging from history to poetry to law. But who are the real people who contributed to the Bible's authorship? As is sometimes the case, historical scholarship and religious teachings don't always match up precisely, and this is true in the case of the question of who wrote the Bible. Centuries of scholarship have investigated and explored this topic, and there's still some debate over it to this day. For some Christians and some conservative Jews, the matter of who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible is simple and straightforward: Moses. According to them, he is behind Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which are together known as the Pentateuch.
God has set before you this day his laws of life and good and death.
In the 18th and 19th centuries, however, German researchers began to take a critical look at the texts and found that they could not have been written by the same man. There were differences in style and language, for example, and differing accounts of the same event told in different ways. Very simply put, the texts have been compiled by different editors and redactors over the years, men whose names have largely been lost to history. It was these writings that were eventually gathered and compiled into the Pentateuch. After the Pentateuch, the next major section of the Old Testament is its 12 books of history, beginning with Joshua and concluding with Esther. These works cover a centuries-long period, starting out with an insight into God's relationship with his people following their return from captivity in Egypt. They then progress through the height of Israel's strength as a regional power, followed by its decline and the eventual captivity of the Israelites. 4 of the major books from this section are those of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, believed for centuries to have been written by Joshua and Samuel themselves. However, the language in those texts bears similarity to that of Deuteronomy, leading some Bible scholars to conclude that they were written by the same person. It's also likely that they could have been compiled by Jewish priests serving during the Israelites' captivity in Babylon in the middle of the 5th century BCE. The Old Testament section on history is followed by one more section, the Prophets, which is sometimes divided into major and minor. While tradition and some teachings hold that they were written by the men whose names they bear, history has come up with a less straightforward explanation. For example, consider the prophet Isaiah, whose name is counted among the major prophets. The first part of his book may very well have been written by the man himself. The second part, however, represents a stark tonal shift and may have been compiled by later editors. The third section bears linguistic similarity to Deuteronomy and could have been written by the author of that text. For the prophet Jeremiah, ascribing authorship is even more complicated. It could have been Jeremiah himself, it could have been a man he mentions as having been one of his scribes, or it could have been one of the Pentateuch's authors. That said, linguistic analysis points to these books having been written or compiled by people other than those assumed by dogma.
What is his name?
Jesus.
While the Old Testament covers a period of hundreds of years with an authorship traditionally attributed to over a dozen men, the New Testament is apparently more straightforward. It only covers around a single century, and its authorship has been historically and dogmatically attributed to only a handful of writers. Tradition claims that the Gospels were written by the men for whom they were named, including Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These were contemporaries of Jesus who lived and ministered alongside him, from circa 4 BCE to circa 30 CE. However, this is likely untrue. The Gospels weren't written until around 70 CE, a solid 4 decades after the death of Jesus. In his book, Jesus Interrupted, Bible scholar Bart Ehrman claims that the Gospels were compiled from oral tradition. He also suggests that the editors who compiled them attached the names of Jesus' disciples in order to inform readers as to the supposed authority behind each gospel. One of the most important figures in the New Testament is the Apostle Paul. The Jewish teacher who converted to Christianity traditionally wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament, all of them letters to various churches throughout the Mediterranean region. The narrative of these works provides much of the basis of Christian practice and doctrine 2 millennia later. But did Paul actually write the epistles as tradition and dogma hold? Well, kind of. He likely wrote 7 of them, with the remaining 6 having been assigned his name by later editors who probably wanted to lend authenticity to their writings by attaching Paul's name to them. The Pauline epistles believed to be almost certainly written by him are Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, and Philemon. The rest are believed to have been written by others. Outside of the Gospels and the Pauline epistles are 3 more sections in the New Testament: history, general epistles, and prophecy. History here refers to the book of Acts, which describes the activities of Jesus' disciples in the decades immediately after his death. The author of this section claims to be Luke, the same man as the purported author of the Gospel bearing his name. It was indeed likely to be written by the same man. The term general epistles refers to epistles not written by Paul. Purportedly written by Jesus' disciples, these books were almost certainly compiled or written by others, in some cases decades or even centuries after their supposed writers' deaths. The New Testament's one book of prophecy is Revelation. Tradition holds that it was written by Jesus' disciple John. However, it was more likely written by John the Elder, a